The rain ended, but the silence it left behind was worse. Bayou Springs was a place where folks knew each other by the weight of their footsteps, the smell of their cooking, the rhythm of their routines. When something broke that rhythm, it didn't take long for talk to rise like steam from the bayou. And when Tom Harper brought that silent boy home, wet and shaking from the tide, the town's murmur turned into a growl. They said he should have called someone sooner. That it wasn't his place. That maybe he didn't want to call. They said it the way people do when fear dresses up like certainty. Even those who had nodded to Tom for years now looked through him, past him, as if his presence made the air colder. He stopped going to the grocer after the third trip ended with him leaving empty-handed. The first time, the cashier pretended not to see him. The second, a man in line behind him muttered something about people who shouldn't be around kids. The third, they simply closed the register when he approached. Lily stood beside him that day, clutching a basket with eggs and apples and the last pack of oatmeal they could afford. He gently took the basket from her hands, set it down on the floor, and walked her out without a word. Even Roy stopped coming around. Roy, who had known Tom since they were boys, who had helped rebuild the boat motor 3 summers back, who had cried with Tom the day his wife's illness finally took her. Now he couldn't even look Tom in the eye when they passed each other at the bait shop. Roy had gone out alone last week and didn't mention it. The isolation came slowly but filled every corner of Tom's world. The places that once held warmth, the diner, the docks, the porch of the bait shop where fishermen swapped stories and coffee, now felt hostile. The town had made up its mind, and no explanation could undo it. When Lily returned from school one afternoon, her shoes soaked through from walking in the rain, she didn't speak. She simply handed Tom an envelope. Inside was a typed letter from the school board, its language carefully chosen but clear, due to recent events and community concerns. It is best if Lily continues her studies from home until a full review is conducted. Tom held the letter in his hands for a long time. Then he folded it, set it on the table, and told Lily to wash up. That night, they read from one of her old school books by lantern light. He helped her sound out words she already knew, just to fill the silence. She didn't ask why she wasn't allowed back, and he didn't explain. There was nothing to say. By the end of the week, the notice arrived. The property, still soaked from the recent storms, had been deemed structurally unsound. The bank cited safety risks, delinquent payments, and ongoing investigation concerns. The tone was cold, distant, the kind of detachment that came from legal templates and unchecked boxes. Tom didn't argue. He knew what it meant. The dock he'd built with his own hands, the home he and his wife had painted the year Lily was born, the shed where he kept her baby shoes and a coffee tin, all of it would be gone. A man from the county came by to confirm it. He didn't step past the gate, just left a copy of the notice on the fence and drove off before Tom could speak. That night, they didn't sleep inside. They couldn't. He carried Lily's backpack, the heater, 2 blankets, and a box of canned goods to the boat shed near the edge of the marsh. The roof leaked, but it was dry enough. They laid the blankets over old crates and tried to pretend it was camping. Lily never complained. She curled into her father's arms like she had when she was 5, after her mother's funeral, when neither of them knew what to say. The gas heater ticked softly, and the smell of wet rope and old fuel lingered in the air. Tom stared at the beams overhead, tracing the water stains in the wood. His eyes didn't close. Not because of fear, but because of the stillness. He didn't know how to sleep when his world had been taken piece by piece. Somewhere near dawn, a sound stirred him. It was soft, a single knock. Not loud enough to startle, but enough to be heard. When he opened the shed door, the air was cool and pale with morning. The wind pressed against the marsh grasses, and the smell of brine floated in. But there was no person. Only an envelope on the step. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a note, written in thick, shaky pen strokes that cut across the paper like they'd been made in haste or fear, or both. Thank you for saving my nephew. Help is coming. Hold on. There was no name. No return address. Just those 12 words. Tom stood in the doorway for a long time, the paper trembling in his hand. He didn't wake Lily. He just watched the horizon as the sky began to turn. Somewhere, a heron called out over the water. He didn't know what help meant. He didn't know who had written it or what they were risking to do so. But in that moment, something shifted. The wind felt less sharp. The boat creaked in a way that sounded almost like greeting. For the first time in weeks, Tom allowed himself the smallest breath of hope, not for rescue, but for recognition. That someone, somewhere, had seen what he did. Had understood that kindness, even when misunderstood, was still the right choice. The town had turned its back. But the marsh, the water, the sky, and perhaps someone watching, had not. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the first vibration reached the boat shed, a distant hum that grew steadily louder. Tom had been awake for hours, his body rigid from the cold and his mind racing in endless, silent loops. He didn't expect salvation. Not really. But he hadn't discarded the letter either. He folded it carefully, placed it inside an old thermos that once belonged to his wife, and set it by the door like it was something sacred. Now, as Lily stirred beside him and rubbed her eyes, the noise grew into a tremble in the earth. Birds scattered from the reeds. Water rippled across the marsh. And then it came. 6 matte black military vehicles rolled down the gravel path, the kind with thick wheels and reinforced sides, the kind that didn't arrive by accident. They moved with purpose, kicking up mud and leaves, until they lined up in perfect precision along the dock. Behind them, a low-flying helicopter circled once and hovered above the treetops, its blades slicing the air in heavy rhythm. Lily clutched her father's hand. Not in fear, but in something deeper, a child's instinct that when the world shifts this suddenly, only a parent can anchor her. Soldiers emerged, silent and alert. Their boots struck the ground in unison. Most wore fatigues. 2 were in plain black. One carried a small satchel, the kind used for medical kits. Another had a tablet, already flickering with signals and maps. The American flag stitched to their shoulders was the only color on them, bold against the morning fog. And then, between the last 2 vehicles, the boy appeared. The same boy from the shoreline. He stepped out slowly, eyes scanning, cautious but no longer afraid. He wore a clean sweatshirt, still a size too large, and his hand clung tightly to that of a tall man in a civilian suit. The man looked worn, the same weight Tom had seen in his own mirror after the funeral, after the storms. The way grief and responsibility pressed down on a person, reshaping the very way they stood. The man nodded to Tom, then stepped forward. He wasn't military, but everyone deferred to him. Even the soldiers held back as he approached the shed. "I'm Agent Caldwell," he said quietly. "You found my son." There were no formalities, no handshakes. Only that sentence, dropped like a stone into the still water between them. Tom didn't answer. He didn't know how. Caldwell knelt beside Lily, who looked up at him with cautious eyes. He smiled faintly, then turned to the boy, Oliver. He wouldn't speak for 2 days, Caldwell continued, rising. "We thought we'd lost him. Thought maybe the extraction failed." Tom's breath caught in his throat. Caldwell explained that Oliver was the son of a deep-cover federal operative. His team had been embedded for 3 years dismantling a global trafficking network. During the final raid, the safe house was compromised. In the chaos, Oliver had gone missing. They'd feared the worst. But instead, he'd ended up on the shoreline, half-drowned and cold, and had been pulled from that fate not by protocol, not by agencies, but by a man with a broken boat and too many problems of his own. "You didn't just find him," Caldwell said. "You shielded him." Tom's hands remained at his sides. The words felt unreal. As if they were happening to someone else. Caldwell gestured, and 2 soldiers brought forward a hard case. Inside were photographs, documents, logs. Evidence of the operation. Among them, a folder bearing Tom's name, intelligence photos taken without his knowledge. Images of him lifting Oliver through the rain. Carrying him. Feeding him. standing guard in his own living room while lightning cracked over the bayou. "We were watching," Caldwell said. "Had to be sure. You passed every measure." Tom didn't want thanks. He didn't even want understanding. But hearing those words, "you passed," struck something inside him that had been frozen for too long. And then came the moment that rewrote everything. A soldier stepped forward, carrying a plaque. It bore the seal of the Department of Homeland Security and one line engraved in solid brass: "For protecting what others could not see." The soldier presented it in silence, and every man behind him stood straighter. Not because they were told to, but because they understood what it meant. Even Lily seemed to feel it. She held the edge of her father's jacket and looked up at him as if seeing him for the first time, not just as a father, not just as a fisherman, but as something larger. Tom accepted the plaque without a word. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because anything he might say would lessen the weight of the moment. The townspeople began arriving shortly after the convoy settled in. First, the mayor. Then the sheriff, who had signed the property seizure order. Then Roy. Then the grocery clerk. The principal. A crowd gathered along the muddy path, drawn not by invitation, but by consequence. They stood silently, watching the man they had cast out now surrounded by soldiers and salutes. The boy they had feared now laughing softly beside Lily. And the home they deemed unworthy now marked as a safe house for federal protection. No apologies were spoken. No one stepped forward with flowers or words. But their stillness said everything. Regret has a language all its own. Lily stepped back into the shed to gather her things. She returned holding the thermos, the one with the letter inside. She handed it to Caldwell. He opened it, read the note inside, and closed his eyes. "My sister wrote this," he said, his voice unsteady. "She never told us. She must have been the one who tracked him. You gave her peace." The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, warming the cracked boards of the dock. The helicopter slowly lifted, then disappeared into the sky. Tom stood at the edge of his dock, the plaque still in hand, the wind brushing through his thinning hair. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But for the first time in weeks, he stood tall. And behind him, the town stood still, listening to the silence, one now filled not with judgment, but with something deeper. Respect. The convoy remained at the dock well into the evening, transforming the once abandoned property into a humming node of quiet activity. Soldiers erected temporary barriers, swept the perimeter, and set up communications gear. But none of it disturbed the stillness that had settled over Bayou Springs. If anything, it amplified it. By nightfall, word of what had happened, and whom Tom had helped, had reached every porch, every church, every back room of the small Louisiana town. No announcement had been made, yet cars began pulling up along the gravel road, headlights off, engines idling. People stood quietly near their bumpers, not sure if they were there to witness history or to ask forgiveness. Tom didn't address them. He remained near the shed, speaking occasionally with Agent Caldwell, who now spent as much time by Lily's side as by Oliver's. Caldwell's eyes followed Tom often, as if measuring the weight of what one man's decency had done against the enormity of an entire operation. By morning, the shed was replaced with a mobile command tent. The wind carried voices across the marsh, coded transmissions, and short bursts of orders, but the heart of it all, the center, remained Tom's dock. And everything changed after the footage aired. A local reporter, hungry for a break, had managed to interview one of the soldiers who'd been dispatched to the site. She pieced together the story through official confirmations, security footage, and the hesitant approval of Caldwell himself. Within 24 hours, the story had gone national. On television screens across the country, a grainy black and white recording played again and again, a man in a storm-worn coat, bent against the wind, carrying a child through flooded marshland. The man never looked back. He moved forward, always forward, toward the dim outline of a house with one flickering lantern in the window. The caption beneath it read, "Unidentified local rescues missing federal agent's son." But it didn't stay anonymous for long. Tom Harper's name was released during a press briefing. Not by accident, but as a deliberate gesture of gratitude. Caldwell's voice, measured and formal, spoke from the podium. He did what many wouldn't. He acted without knowledge of who the boy was, without any promise of reward. In a moment when the world was indifferent, he chose to protect. The effect was immediate. Flowers arrived first, dropped off at the shed-turn command post by local children and elderly women who remembered Tom's wife and how she used to braid Lily's hair outside in the summer. Notes came too, scribbled in uncertain handwriting. Sorry for what we said. You were right. Thank you for protecting him like he was your own. Roy returned one afternoon carrying a coil of rope and a rusted toolbox. Let's fix that pier, he said simply, without looking Tom in the eye. Others followed. The sheriff ordered the property seizure reversed. The mayor issued a public apology, citing an error in judgment that the community regretted. Tom said nothing. He didn't need to. The gesture wasn't for him, it was for their own conscience. New fishing equipment arrived one morning, unmarked, packed in crates with tags from a Veterans Relief Fund. A rebuilt motor came next, donated by a retired Navy engineer from Baton Rouge who had seen Tom's story online and drove 4 hours to install it himself. Then came the letter. Delivered by hand, wrapped in a leather envelope. Inside, it bore the emblem of the Department of Defense and a single sentence. In recognition of your service to national security and your embodiment of the values we swear to uphold. Folded inside the letter was a coin, heavy, gold-rimmed, with an eagle on one side and an inscription on the other. Valor without command. Honor without uniform. Tom placed the coin beside the thermos on the shelf. It made no noise, but its weight shifted the air. The town had changed. Slowly, subtly. People didn't look away anymore. The same grocer who had refused him now kept a small bag by the register marked for Tom. The school invited Lily back, not quietly, but with a letter signed by every teacher, promising protection and respect. She walked through those doors taller than she ever had, Oliver beside her, their backpacks slung over shoulders now a little straighter. The diner began keeping a corner table open, just in case he dropped by. And on the counter sat a tip jar labeled in honor of doing the right thing. Not all gestures were public. Some came in silence, a hand on the shoulder, a nod across the marsh, a thermos left on the dock with hot coffee and a note that simply read thanks. The transformation was not just in how they saw Tom, but in how they saw themselves. Bayou Springs, once so quick to cast judgment, had begged *N to reflect on what it meant to act without certainty, to be kind without proof. And slowly, the town became softer. Tom never changed who he was. He rose before dawn, checked his traps, repaired his boat. He kept a photo of his wife by the window and folded Lily's clothes with the same care as always. But now, when he stepped into town, people moved aside not from suspicion, but to make room. The convoy departed 2 weeks later. The final vehicle rolled away just after sunrise, leaving behind only tracks in the gravel and a rustling hush that seemed to linger over the dock. The flags were folded, the radio silent, and the wind once again belonged to the reeds and the water. Bayou Springs returned to its pace, slow, familiar, steady. But nothing was quite the same. The shed, once a refuge of shame and survival, was torn down and replaced by a modest guest cabin. It had 2 rooms and a tin roof that echoed beautifully in the rain. Soldiers had helped build it. Volunteers had painted it. Lily chose the curtains. The house was repaired too. Not fully renovated, Tom refused that. Just made whole again, board by board. The broken shingles replaced. The back door rehung. The porch steps, the ones his wife used to sit on in the evenings, restored exactly as they were. Oliver stayed for a time. His father, Agent Caldwell, came and went depending on operations, his visits dictated by protocols and classified schedules. But when he was there, he didn't hover. He watched. He watched Oliver grow stronger, steadier. He watched the boy laugh while feeding the chickens, tie knots alongside Tom on the pier, listen with wide eyes as Lily explained tide charts and marsh safety. He saw his son come back to life not through therapy or tactics, but through routine, through belonging. Tom never asked for custody. There were no papers. No legal claims. Just a silent agreement between two men who had both lost too much, one offering steadiness, the other offering trust. Each morning, the dock creaked with familiar rhythm, Tom checking traps, Lily readying her school bag, Oliver trailing behind with a notebook in hand. The boy had taken to drawing fish, birds, boats, and had covered the walls of the guest cabin with sketches, careful and detailed. One drawing caught Tom's eye. It was the dock from above, like seen from the sky, two figures standing at the edge. A tall man. A smaller boy. No faces, just outlines. In the corner of the paper, a single phrase was written in block letters. Safe places exist. The townspeople accepted the change, even embraced it. There was a quiet recognition now in every interaction, the way the waitress poured coffee without asking, the nods on Main Street, the space always made at the counter or in the line. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something slower, deeper. Lily returned to school and quickly became the kind of girl teachers spoke about during staff meetings, curious, kind, quick to help. Oliver followed her like a shadow, always a few steps behind, always watching. The two became inseparable. They walked together, studied together, even fished together, casting lines from the end of the dock in companionable silence. Sometimes, Caldwell joined them. He stood at a distance, hand on his hip, eyes scanning, not out of caution, but out of awe. He once told Tom, as they stood by the water tossing stale bread to gulls, he sleeps through the night now. First time since the safe house. I don't know what you did. Tom only shrugged. I didn't do anything special. But Caldwell knew. Everyone knew. One morning, after the rain had passed and the sky was sharp and blue, something new appeared at the edge of the dock. No one saw who brought it. There were no footprints, no tire marks, just a small, hand-carved wooden sign. It stood waist-high, anchored by two posts and weatherproofed against the tide. The words etched into it were simple. Here, one man chose courage over fear. No signature. No date. Just truth. Tom didn't touch it. He didn't question who had left it. He only nodded once and went about his day, setting out bait, rinsing buckets, checking Lily's homework before school. That afternoon, Oliver brought home another drawing, the dock sign, surrounded by trees and water, with birds flying overhead. Tom pinned it to the wall next to Lily's spelling list and an old family photo. It felt right there, among the small things that made a life. The dock became more than just a place to fish. Veterans began visiting, quietly and without fanfare. Some brought flags, others brought nothing but silence. One man left behind a bronze star wrapped in cloth. Another left a Bible, its margins filled with notes. They didn't come to be seen. They came because they understood. One quiet afternoon, as the sun set over the marsh, Tom sat at the edge of the dock with a thermos in hand, the same one that had once held the note. Now it held coffee again, just the way his wife used to make it. Strong. Simple. Lily and Oliver sat nearby, working on a puzzle spread across a blanket. The radio played soft jazz, crackling faintly through the static. Tom watched them and thought about all the things he had lost. His wife. His home. His place in the town. And then he thought of what had come in their place. A second chance. A boy who now slept peacefully. A daughter who walked taller. A town that had remembered how to care. He didn't need medals or headlines. He had rhythm. He had purpose. And he had the dock. In the end, no one remembered exactly what day the military left, or when the sign was installed, or who placed the coin on the shelf beside the photo of Tom's wife. But everyone remembered the storm. And everyone remembered the man who, when it mattered most, chose kindness over safety. He didn't know who the boy was. He didn't know what it would cost. He just knew someone needed help. And that, and Bayou Springs, was the day everything changed. Because sometimes, kindness without question is enough.